Welcome to the Weekend Primetime. It was more than 60 years ago that the city of Selma, Alabama became the focal point of the civil rights movement as activists marched more than 50 miles to the state capital of Montgomery to demand voting rights. Today, Montgomery once again became the destination as large crowds of protesters from across the country gathered, as their predecessors did, to demand voting rights. The protest, dubbed All Roads Lead to the South, saw civil rights and faith leaders come out in protest against the Supreme Court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act and the ongoing GOP redistricting maps that would impact Black and Latino communities in Congress. Here's what lawmakers who attended today's protest told rallygoers earlier.
We still live in a country that when we fight, we are here because they thought they could divide us into black and white, rich and poor, southern and northern. They thought they could stop a movement. You can rig a map, but you can't rig a movement. Thanks to the awful decision of these political hacks on the Supreme Court, my 9-year-old and my 7-year-old now have less voter protection than their dad did growing up.
Joining us now is Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MS Now's Politics Nation and founder and president of the National Action Network. So, Rev, tell us, what is the importance of what we are seeing today in Selma, Alabama at this moment in the struggle for voting rights?
It's very important. I think that, as I've said to people, that we need to not forget how we got the Voting Rights Act in the first place. And what they're doing in Alabama today and Louisiana and other places is what they did to get the civil rights movement geared toward a Voting Rights Act. I remember I was too young to have been to the original march, but we've done like commemorations every year. And John Lewis would tell the story of how they faced death and would keep marching. I mean, we're facing now, what, a bad tweet? And or Trump on social media. Now, it can get more dangerous with these people, but we need to understand that if you don't change the climate, Dr. King used to talk about there's a difference between thermostats and thermometers. Thermometers measure the temperature, thermostats change it. We've got to have some thermostat people now that turn the heat up nonviolently while these people are trying to rob us of our rights.
I wanted to ask you about what we just heard there from Senator Warnock, where he talked about how his children now have less rights than their parents. And we heard that comparison as well during the debate around Roe versus Wade, where a lot of women said that, you know, women now in this country have less rights than what their daughters had. But give us the explanation as to what rights have been diminished as a result of being having the Voting Rights Act gutted.
Well, the Voting Rights Act assured that in various districts that had a history of bias, including 2 districts in New York, that there had to be pre-clearance so you would make sure that however you were conducting the district lines were fair. They took all of that out, that you no longer can decide it based on race. They even, what was interesting is they said you can decide it on party. So let me get this right. You can make sure that Democrats and Republicans are good, not even independent parties, I guess. Yeah. But you can't deal with race, that it was a history of racial discrimination. And I think that when Senator Warnock is saying, and some of us that were the generation between Dr. King and John Lewis and now, saying our kids, some of them grown, have less right to having that kind of redress and that kind of examination than we did. So by the time I joined the movement, and I'm 13, 14 years old, it was the 70s, we took for granted this, and they renewed the Voting Rights Act every 5 years. George Bush signed and renewed it. Yeah. All of a sudden, Donald Trump declared war on this, and they've delivered on this. So we've got to go back nonviolently to the streets and deal with this. I remember Andrew Young told me, he said, Al, I remember the day that Lyndon Johnson, as president, signed the Civil Rights Act, and he handed Dr. King a pen. And he said, Dr. King thanked him and says, but we need the right to vote. This was 64. Mm-hmm. And he says, Dr. King, I use all my political juice to get the Civil Rights Act. I don't have enough power left to get the Voting Rights Act through. He says, okay. And Andrew said that we was walking out of the White House, and Andrew Young and looked at him and said, Dr. King, did you hear what the president said? He doesn't have the power to do it. What are we going to do? He led Dr. King looked at him and said, Andy, we're going down south and get the president some power. And that meant go to the streets, because they knew the reaction on television would make people move. And that's what we have to do today.
Speaking of the streets, Rev, I was with you a couple years ago at one of the commemorations in Selma as a young NBC correspondent, and I had this thought then, and I have it now as I look at the images. We have colleagues who are there. I was part of this march. They got to see all these speeches today. You look out into these crowds, and there aren't a lot of young people there. And that's not because young people don't care. I speak to them. I know them. I'm one of them. They do care. But I think that they feel just completely dejected right now. There's this feeling that messages like the one we heard from Senator Cory Booker there, like, when we fight, we win. Well, we've been fighting, and they feel like they've been losing. and I get your point about, that we're dealing with tweets, and that our elders, the people who came before us, they put their lives on the line. And we know that. But it does feel like when people can barely pay their rent at the end of the month, and they're stressed about their jobs, they're being hit from all sides, like, well, how do I have time to get involved into this process if, at the end of the day, I'm watching it all wash away anyway?
Well, I think that first thing they need to understand is that's what most folks felt then. Most young folks didn't march then. There was 100 people went across that bridge. So let's not act like that's a new thing. Most young blacks did not engage in the civil rights movement, and many are not now. A lot of the leaders then were old. A. Philip Randolph called the March on Washington 1963 that we're doing again August 28th. He was 72 years old when he did that. Mandela was 73 when he got out of jail. So it's never been an age thing. It's a commitment thing. It's always going to be a percentage of young people and old people that are going to pay the price for the many. So I wouldn't get too concerned. I didn't go to the march down in Selma today, the rally today, but I sent a young lady who's our senior vice president, who's 30 years younger than me, and she's organizing the march. I'm probably the oldest one on my staff, but it has nothing to do with age, because most people my age were not involved in the movement. So everybody used, well, it's a young thing, like every youth march. The biggest march in the 60s was only 250,000 people. We didn't have a million-man march till 95. So I think that we, in many ways, try to act like something is there that's not there. It's always been the few that paid the price for the many. And I think there's enough young people and old people that's willing to organize to get this done.
Rev, I'm wondering if you could lay out what the actual stakes are for Black Americans, for other members of racial minorities, if their political views are no longer represented in Congress. What happens? What
happens is everything that they fear that she talks about, it gets cemented and gets worse. And what I say to a lot of people, old and young, is that you are not taking for granted things that we naturally got as a result of these laws. Because we could vote, you've got things like Medicaid and Medicare and Obamacare, and this is your life. You got things like public education funding and public health funding. All of that goes away, because if you don't have people in Congress and in the Senate that will vote to protect the lifestyle you have, including looking at what private industry is doing with mortgage rates and rent rate, all of that. We want affordable life. Well, who do you think is going to decide that? The people that are elected. They're voted. I was telling some young people at a rally 3 days ago, we want reparations. Who's going to give it to you? You going to pay yourself? The people that are in office are going to decide that. They need to understand everything you want will be decided by others if your right to vote is not protected and if you don't exercise it.
Rev, there are some strategists who actually say that this could potentially backfire on Republicans, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term. And I want to read you a tweet from the state auditor in Mississippi who posted, quote, "I've heard the GOP establishment in Mississippi say we can't redistrict Benny Thompson because the map makers might mess up and accidentally create 2 Democrat districts." And he's arguing that if that were true, the Democrats in Mississippi would be fighting for them to do it. Now, granted, this is a food fight among different factions of Republicans, but is there an element of political risk for Republicans here, trying for the short-term gains and not looking to the future and to the long term?
I think it is a risk if we make it risky by having maximum turnout by the people in that district that are not of that persuasion. But if they don't vote at those numbers, then the risk is down. The risk is up when you can maximize. That's why many of us are saying get people out to vote and start what was started today to mobilize and energize people, because you could have people energized to vote that are now in a district where they're a minority, and the majority of the district feel, well, it's been cut up, I ain't got to worry about it, and they get a lower voter turnout, and they end up losing. But that will only happen if you have maximum turnout of voters.
So can I just pick up on that and share this poll with you? There's a poll that talks about the balance between Democrats' power versus black power in districts. 54% say it is important to protect voting power of black voters by creating majority-minority districts, even if it means not drawing as many Democratic seats. 26% say Democrats should create as many Democratic seats as possible, even if it means reducing or diluting the voting power of black voters. What do you think is the smarter play here? What do you think is, I mean, in a perfect world, you would get as many Democratic seats with as much black representation as possible. But in a situation where you have to be tactical, do you have a preference?
Well, I think you've got to protect black voters. You have to remember, in Memphis, the district they just took out, which was a majority black district, they elected and reelected a white man named Congressman Cohen. So just because the district is black voters does not mean they're only going to put in black people in the office. We're not racist. We're saying that we have a history of discrimination we've got to face. You cannot address the racial discrimination by just saying it's enough to get some Democrats. You have some Democrats that, in my judgment, let us down. So I think that you can't answer a racial question with a political party answer.
All right. Reverend Al Sharpton, really appreciate you joining